We now come to the moment, I think, which is defining on what to do on the way forward. And this is going to be a short moderators panel where the moderators are called upon to give us the low-hanging fruit. What can we really do? And I will moderate that panel, and at the same time, we will have the question and answer. Now, for the question and answer, we have numbered boards, where when the person asks the question, you will be handed over the number before you ask the question, so that we don't jump the queue. In fact, we have to practice what we preach, and today we have tried to do little things like free seating to the extent possible, inviting everyone representing Sri Lanka, and also having this numbering system, because many a time the first person or the previous person, the one who is really there to ask the question, is waiting for a long time, and somebody else who comes in later with a question actually jumps the queue. So not jumping the queue is another lesson in governance. So may I invite, if Murtaza is here, since that was a sole presentation, and the three moderators, Shehara, Dr. Arjuna, and Dr. Pakisoti, to take your seats on the stage. Okay, this is going to be a very short session because we have heard quite a lot on low-hanging fruit and the way forward. I think one of the presentation made by Murtaza, I think that requires a high degree of strategy and intelligence. And we have also heard from Maitri Gunaratna, what we really require into the future, and also Oma has put a very structured, way forward. So I'm not going to waste your time, but really ask the moderators and the presenter, Murtaza, to give us one or two or maximum 3 actions. One obviously would be in the policy arena for the government, but what can we actually do as civil society? Murtaza, over to you.
So I think the most important thing is that, as I tried to explain from the book, Why Nations Fail, the reason Sri Lanka has not lived up to its potential is that we have had political and economic extractive institutions. So we have to change these highly extractive institutions to inclusive institutions, where basically the best and the brightest of our country through hard work and innovation can succeed in this country. The fundamental problem is that this country has been run for the benefit of 1,000 people and not for the benefit of the 22 million people who are the citizens of this nation. So how does that translate into action? I mean, there is a connection to many of the other panels in terms of politics, because the executive presidency concentrates too much of power, and it is a highly extractive institution. The second thing is the 13th Amendment that has been also spoken about has a big economic implication, because it kind of talks about how the country will be administered and how resources will be raised and how resources will be spent. So as Tara Dimel also tried to mention in terms of education, I think what has to happen in economic management is policy has to be set at the center, but there has to be delegated authority, because too much of authority is centered at the central government. And although Omar talked about a minister for follow-up, the reality is that execution is at the very granular level. It's at the 3 feet level. So a political rearrangement where there is more delegation for execution at the provincial level is also needed. The second item is that whatever we need to do, we have to be upfront about it. I mean, the temptation is to kick the can down the road. But the problem is that if we do that, we will become like another Argentina, where for the first time in our history, we have defaulted on our foreign debt. But Argentina has defaulted 7 or 8 times. So we don't want to be a serial defaulter. So that this has happened to us, let's take the cut down as deep as possible and put things right so that basically it won't happen to us again. And the third thing is that the citizens of this country will have to get used to paying taxes. We are a tax haven, and it is the rich people who have to pay taxes. And as Mick Moore says, the benefit of paying taxes is you will enjoy governance because you will ask people to be more accountable. But citizens will also demand from their government a social compact that we pay taxes and our government will in return provide us certain expected levels of governance and administration.
Thank you for that, Murtaza. I think that the last one particularly is quite practical, where we can organize forums, have mechanisms on, discussions on tax and so on. So I think that's a very good opening. And let me just go around in the order of logic, where, there would be a response from the other panel to what you proposed. So therefore, I would like to go to Shehara, because production and service enhancement will give us some of the answers.
So I think the problem is partly that we have institutions like Port City, for example, that doesn't have the teeth. So the law is not in place, the policy, the idea is there, but there's a lot of granular details. How do you have one of the biggest strategies for investment growth without having still given them the power to execute? It's crazy. I would really take, because we have to take almost 50% of government and try and downsize and create efficiency. So the BOI, for example, is 1,800 or something last time I looked, with about 18 zones it's running. How do you take institutions across the board and reduce government? I'd take about 10% of the better people, create an external audit, and in some way monitor progress, like what Omar was talking about, but also just challenge the data. Because most of the data, particularly in the TVEC sector, which is employment generation and a lot of those things, is absolute nonsense. It's figments of imagination because it's internally generated, and year on year to get more expenditure, various numbers and not validated. So I do both those two. But very important, because of the theme of this conference, is I think also the governance issue related to how do we go after some of the money that has been stolen and plundered, and what can we do, and how do we really push that agenda. So again, I think there has to be some mechanism in place where we get some pool of the assets that are not declared. And Nihal Chavikrama once told me that we have a very strong law that says that any public servant who cannot in any way reasonably justify how he acquired these assets, they can be therefore deemed to have been got mala fide or something, and therefore it could be acquired. And we in some way generate this towards some of the social good and welfare we have to do.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Chehara. Can I just zoom in on that? So what would be really the civil society action? Now, there are so many videos going around, so many discussions on the STAR process, the United Nations and the World Bank being involved in, going after money that is stolen. What is the singular action that we can actually implement, start and do in this whole quagmire?
So I think it's misplaced for the UN and organizations like that who are also not grounded in reality. The UN itself is got lots of governance issues related to, sort of its peace building and everything else. So I don't think they don't come from a pragmatic world of, having worked within the system. So we have to find in some way a way in which actually civil society really chases after it. We tend to, skirt around, whether it's the Panama Papers or the Nadesans or anyone where there seems to be a fair amount of evidence. We just drop the ball and we move off somewhere. So it's a very higgledy-piggledy process. Some people have to be watchdogs and really go down till we finally get some heads to roll. And I think then people will think that accountability really exists. Up to now, it's a joke.
Thank you for that. So I think without an education system at all levels, which builds the caliber of people to carry out the tasks, we are simply lost. So I would like to turn to Dr. Arjuna Parakrama. What would be the kind of complementary and supportive actions in response to what the moderators and the presenter just stated?
Thank you. I think we've divided our three core ideas into equality, quality, and value. So I think I'd like to spell them out because I think the principles are as important as the actual actions that we recommend. First about equality, respecting both the cherished principle and indispensable national role of free education as a basic human right in Sri Lanka. The core challenge is to make sure that free education benefits the neediest most in sustainable and meaningful ways, that it is accountable and transparent in its design, implementation, and management. And here I think we may disagree, and that's a good thing, that we think that as long as it's a basic right, it includes the right to education in the language of one's choice, not to make it compulsory that everybody should study in English or something else. So what we do have still is a link between the socioeconomic class and the educational attainment of students. I think that link is still there, despite and maybe because of diminishing free education. So the challenge again is to ensure income poor, access restricted families receive more than nominal education of little added value, while we have to balance that with providing upper middle class and middle class or children with greater opportunities. So both must be done, greater opportunities, while not reducing free education for the income poor families to the barest minimum. This very clearly, so that free education cannot and should not be the lowest common denominator of ever diminishing worth and value. So this requires, and it's clear, this requires a significant increase in state expenditure for education, which we have had diminishing go over and over again. We are now among the lowest spenders in terms of percentage of GDP in all of Asia, and in South Asia, we are on par with Afghanistan. So we have to then realize it also needs clear conceptualization and planning, as well as refusal to narrowly politicize all decision making. We've talked about the need to decentralize, to devolve. We need, very clearly we've been saying over and over again, reasonable policies have not been implemented, there are ideological and vested interests. In fact, the system is designed to fail, successfully designed to fail, to maintain entrenched hierarchies. Oversight needs to be external, independent, monitoring and accountability cannot be as it is now, self-seeking and an obstacle to progress. So when we look at quality, with quality we see that there is, exacerbated by the pandemic and the crisis and so on, we have a combination of waste and mismanagement with discriminatory budgeting, which includes regional discrimination, school-wise discrimination, sectoral discrimination. So this increases the unfair advantage enjoyed by those privileged few who have access to private schools, universities, and a handful of special government schools and other tertiary education systems. So the second challenge then is how these gaps in comparative standards should be reduced through effective and accountable teacher training, participatory and appropriate curriculum development, including STEAM, a revamped assessment system that includes an overhaul of public examinations after a transformation in school governance and attitudes that ensure integrity. So if that's about quality, and we need to increase the quality, then we need values. All this change in employability, instrumental worth of educational programs, STEAM, etc., become both less than useful and manifestly impossible if violence and anti-democratic practices by all segments engaged in education and higher education are allowed to flourish with impunity. Violence on the campuses must stop, whether it is a scourge of ragging and or sexual predation, brutality, bullying, and for this to take place, legal remedies, though important, cannot be the only response. We urgently need values education with a humanities focus that includes gender awareness, ethnic and cultural pluralism, that accepts richness in diversity as a cherished way of life, combined with strict enforcement of laws to punish violence of all kinds. No impunity. And those are our three. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So if we can at least get to a fraction of that list and just take one action, I think it would be, a good start. And just to ask the audience, we have got a file outside, and anyone who wishes to, join up on the way forward, either as a member of a think tank in these sectors, perhaps we will ask our, esteemed speakers to be the seeds of that. You can either become a think tank member or a part of a whistleblower team, or you can be part of an action group which researchers and proposes models and ways forward. And you could also be a monitor or an adjudicator on the way forward, because we need to be monitored ourselves. From this talk shop, how much are we really going into a workshop and how much are we really going to work? So we need people to monitor us. We need the media to monitor us on the way forward. Now I turn to Dr. Pakisoti to ask again, what is really actionable in this sphere?
Well, I think in the course of my panel, I think two things came up. One was the whole question of within communities, the whole question of discrimination along caste lines or whatever. And the other one was with regard to the 13th Amendment. And as I tried to clarify, the 13th Amendment is just not for the North and East alone, it is for the entire country. Let me start with the first one. With regard to the 1957 legislation that was cited, again, the whole question about ensuring that the legislation is implemented and that is acted upon, we have to start lobbying members of parliament, we have to have civil society meetings within those communities that make sure that everyone knows what this law is all about and what it would lead to. Yeah? So that's very much focused targeting of those who can make the law work. Likewise, with regard to the 13th Amendment. There are those, already the Malvatta and Askiriya Mahanayakas have written to the president and said, do not implement it. And his position is that, look, it's part of the Constitution. If people don't like it, bring legislation to repeal it. So that's a challenge that they should take up. But it is absolutely scandalous, I think, that for 37 odd years, a part of the Constitution of this country is not being implemented. That is absolutely disgraceful. We also have in that Constitution stuff that says that even though it's contrary to the Constitution, you nevertheless can, it's still to be upheld. So we really need to get the rule of law right in all aspects and ensure again that if this is implemented and implemented in full. And there again, we need an island-wide campaign, because it's not just with regard to the North and East, it's with regard to the entire country. So, those two things are two things that one would always want to focus on. I think there are a number of other things, but they didn't come in to that discussion, so I will leave it out.
So thank you very much for that. I think it's very clear that citizen engagement and dialogue on a number of these thematic areas is really necessary. And now, on the way forward, we would be recording this, the proceedings, and we will come back to you, and we will ask, hopefully, if you volunteer to be the start of these think tanks, we'll come back to you for refinement on the way forward. So now the floor is open for questions, and we have these numbers that will be given when you raise your questions, so that you would not be waiting very long in the queue. Can we start with the questions? Pratana, can you also record the questions?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. Can the mics be sent out? I think there are extra mics there. Tushi. So we will take the first few numbers that now have been distributed. There's quite a lot. And let's make it very short, in that not a lot about the explanation of the background, but let's get crisply to the question. And here I again emulate Murtaza, who told me on email, look, Visakha, I don't want a long harangue. One line, introduction. So let's get very crisp. Okay, who's going to raise question number 1?
This is to Mr. Pakisoti Saranmuthu. You mentioned about the ethnic problem and also the reconciliation. Just want to make this a small statement and a question at last. And I also agree with Mr. Arun that for me, I think there's no ethnic problem in this country, because legally and constitutionally, there's no discrimination against any citizen in this country. According to the constitution, all the citizens are equal. So one of the Tamil politicians once said that they want a separate...
Sir, what is your question? Can we get... Yes.
I'm coming at that question.
Very brief comment.
Yeah, that's correct. So they want to separate state in the north to address the grievances. When I asked about the grievances, he said no, and then we want to meet the aspirations of the Tamils. That's why we want a separate state in the north. Then I said more than 50% of the Tamil populations are living in the south. So if you give a separate state to the north, what about the aspiration of the Tamils in the south? That means does that mean that you are not concerned about their aspirations, or you are satisfied that their aspirations have been already met? So my question is about reconciliation. About 25,000 Sinhalese were living in north, and 15,000 Muslims were living in north. So Prabhakaran and the separatist Tamil politicians resorted to ethnic cleansing and chased away all those things. So as a first step of reconciliation, do you think that we should resettle all these Sinhalese and the Muslims who are living in the north?
What is? Can you just state your question again,
yes,
very clearly
as the first
and
step,
briefly?
As a first step of reconciliation, you mentioned about reconciliation. There have been 25,000 Sinhalese and 15,000 Muslim families who were living in north because they were the LTT resorted to ethnic cleansing and chased away all the Sinhalese and the Muslims. At the first step of reconciliation, do you think it's a good idea to resettle all these Muslims and the Sinhalese who were living in the north?
Yeah. Yeah.
As the first step of reconciliation, okay? If you want to live among all people as Sri Lankans.
Okay, sir. Because we really need to limit the time. There are about
okay,
15 questions.
Disturb
Just a moment. Yes. Okay. Yes.
It's an excellent question indeed. Any community that has committed atrocities, anything bordering war crimes or crimes against humanity, must pay recompense. And so, the case with regard to the Muslims and the Sinhalese, where are they going to be settled? As Arjuna just told me, yes, how about those military camps? Likewise, how about asking Mr. Karuna to stand for trial for the murder of the 600 policemen? All of those things have to be done to reconcile. It's not one community or another. Every single one has blood on their hands. And if we are going to clean, we can't cherry pick and clean selectively.
Thank you. Let us take questions 2, 3, and 4 so that, we save time. Number 2.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? I am Dr. M.R. Mohammed. I am product of Peradeniya and work nearly 5 universities in Sri Lanka and lived abroad, Europe and Middle East. My question to the panel is, okay, the concern on the attitudes, also the reconciliation, and the taking money from IMF. We are calling for decolonization and ethnic harmony. Coming to the point, the central point of education is without value, without morals. As an intellectual person, I studied in the Peradeniya University and Columbia University. I never studied how to rebuild this nation. Becoming a lecturer, I never teach how to rebuild this nation. Tell me where we can learn to rebuild this nation, that lesson in Sri Lanka. My question is clear to you.
Sir, I think there's a problem with the sound and you are a bit muffled. If you can speak really directly to the mic and just raise the last part, your question clearly.
As intellectual people, we need to teach to the people, students or general public, civil society, how to rebuild this nation, from where we can learn.
Yeah. Who would like to take that? Dr. Arjuna?
Directed to whom, sir?
To the civil society first, also in a university level, where we can teach, where we can learn. I am product of Peradeniya and Colombo.
Okay, so that's... Okay, the next question. We can take these together then. Number 3, isn't it?
I'm Roshni Desaram, a businesswoman. Can I? Yeah. This question is to Mr. Arjuna. Nobody touched on the mayhem created by the media in this whole forum today. I would like to know what we can do for biased media reporting. Each TV channel, radio channel, they take whichever political party they would like to take on and then give biased news, they do biased programs, biased political programs. So I would like to know how you all are going to sort that out in the future for our good governance. Thank you.
Okay, if we can remember those questions, we can take another one. Number 4.
I think it's a doctor.
You have to come in the numbering system. Sorry to say.
It is appalling to hear, I think Mr. Jafferty, who said about having tenders without having an open tender system, just to award tenders willy-nilly. And this is happening now, this happened yesterday. And furthermore, what is highlighted is the fact on a whisper by a leader of one country to the other, they could hand over the Adoni, the solar power project just to that firm alone. This is totally unacceptable. It's criminal because the country is trying to get the economy strengthened at a time like this. This sort of thing should not happen. And for that, we should have checks and balances. And I want to know from the panel, should we not have some form of strictures or checks and balances to prevent this happening even by the leader of the country? Can not the Supreme Court empower itself? What is detrimental to the country should not happen just on a whisper, just over 2 individuals agreeing what's going to be held ransom, a whole nation to a ransom.
Okay, so if we can take those 3, the last one, who would like to take? Yes.
Yeah. So the question was, how are these things done? Well, they're done within the gambit of the law. Last year, the Electricity Act was amended. The Electricity Act specified only competitive bidding. They took it away. So that's how things happen, that they say that it was an inhibitor for development of the sector. They took the mandate for competitive bidding out so that they can do the very things that are happening. It's very simple. But I think civil society can go to the Supreme Court and challenge this. I think the power purchase agreement has not been signed because we don't know what the tariff is. Somebody or a group of people should challenge this.
That's very doable.
Just to give a flip side, I agree entirely with Murtaza, somebody should. But in many countries all over the world, there are things called solicited proposals and unsolicited. So it is possible that, say, if Bill Gates comes and gives us some kind of, I don't want to equate Adani or them to that, but there is possible that there is a legendary story of how Chandrika sat on a bar stool and spoke to Bill Gates, and it was objected because it didn't come through due channels. So you do have both methodologies, but in this particular case, I think the example you gave, it must be followed through with litigation and challenged.
So I will just add to what Shehara said. How you do deal with unsolicited proposals is there is something called the Swiss challenge. So we should encourage people to give unsolicited proposals, but under the Swiss challenge, it's put on a website and you're given 3 months whether anybody else can improve on that.
That's very good, yes. Questions number 2 and 3, I think.
Let me try. Very challenging questions. I think our speakers spoke to this, that one of the problems when you want to discuss rebuilding the nation is if the emphasis is only on the economic, if the emphasis is only on the financial, then you lose what we talked about in terms of values education. We have been asking very clearly for values education to be introduced, but what we've heard certainly in the last 2-3 years and much more so after the crisis is that education is instrumental. It is to get you something, a job, a better job, an even better job, and so on, or to cater to a market. We believe education goes well beyond that. Education must be rooted in values, and that is the failure. We don't have education that's rooted in values. The examples given by our panel about values education, question of how people should be citizens, so education for active citizenship, all of that kind of stuff. I think the education of the Aragale on active citizenship was an example in point. But in the universities too, we have mentioned there is a complete breakdown. That is why there's violence and there's impunity. But unfortunately, and I'm sorry people have left, but that violence and impunity pervades the entire system. So state violence and state impunity is yet another thing, which I want to tie in with the question on the media. So we have to have our students learning about what is right and what is wrong. Unfortunately, as pointed out by Sarah, religious institutions don't seem to be doing that either, because they are also politically and ideologically engaged. So certain kinds of violence are condoned by certain kinds of religious institutions. So the values have to come at a different place, young we believe, and continuously, like brushing your teeth. Now in universities there's a breakdown of value because there is an entire range of brutalities that are there, some by the administration, some by the state, and this scourge of violence in the name of ragging and and sexual predation and so on. But I want to tie that in with the media. I would say yes and no. The media is particularly awful. There used to be only 3 professions for which you didn't need any qualifications: politics, teaching English, and the media. For politics now you have a whole range of qualifications that are required. So that's a very highly rarefied field. Many people. For English, the qualification is you should be unqualified. So that's also a qualification. But for the media, again, alas, it looks like there is nothing that enables them. There is no professional stuff. But I would say, where I'm a little more skeptical, is the public is aware. The public is aware which channel they need to do on TV to hear this particular point of view. If you want to hear the government's point of view, go to channel A. If you want to hear the point of view of those who are in sync with the government, but against the president, you'll go to channel B, and so on. So I think the people are able to read that kind of stuff. That still does not excuse the media for propagating hatred, racism, gossip, and all of that kind of stuff. But of course, our institutions don't help that. So we have a crisis, but the good news is that people are more aware than we think about it.
Okay, thank you so much. That was quite comprehensive. The neest set, and I think we might have to limit it because there are a few items on the agenda. Maybe we will take, yes, questions 5, 6, and 7.
Yeah, rather than questions, I have a couple of comments which I would like to hear the thoughts from the panel.
It will be very helpful if you can go straight to the questions.
Sure.
And make it very succinct.
I would like to recommend that the purpose of power devolution should not be based on race, religion, ethnicity, on all these things that we've adapted since we were born, but to ensure that decisions are made very closer to the local people where they truly affect. And the other recommendation that I have is, let's stop continuing to hope the current system of centralized government will solve all our problems. I think, in other words, they have proven over and over that they really don't have answers, but we as a civil society needs to find answers, just like what you are working out today, and use the government only to implement these, which we need to propose, so that if they fail even the implementation, I think maybe it requires another cycles of Aragalayas. So those are my 2 thoughts. Thanks.
So I think they are more like suggestions and comments and very valuable. Do you require a response or you're sharing your ideas? Yes. So I think, Pratana, you can take those ideas and kindly leave your contact details when you raised or you would like to pursue this journey with us. There is a file, as I said, outside. Please put your name on that. Question number 6.
Question number 6 is mine.
Okay.
Now there is an economic problem. Everybody knows that our people are suffering economically. First of all, people should eat. Only after, when they should come above the poverty line, then only democracy, human rights, all those have some value. First of all, people should come above the poverty line. In Sri Lanka, I read so many places, 5 million people are suffering without proper meals. I am going to give you an idea. Will you take that? To help these 5 million poor Sri Lankans. My idea is basically this.
Yeah, you have, I think, presented a paper to us today.
Sorry?
You presented a paper just before this?
But I am going to give it briefly, but I am trying to say.
Yes.
The solution is, we had to get lot of dollars now, US dollars in billions. So I give a solution to get US $1 billion per year, a solution for that. Do you want to listen to that solution?
Very quickly, or I think we need to have a greater dialogue with you, sir?
No, very quickly.
Yeah, I think we need to take your details, but maybe Murtaza, if you comprehend that, would you like to give a response? Okay, you would like to? Yeah.
No, I'll tell you briefly what it is. The point is, we have to organize a master's course in the world. Master's course in construction management and auditing. This master's course is not there in the whole world. There is a potential for this course, 10 million per year.
Master's course in what?
Construction management and auditing. This course is not there in the whole world. There are 10,000 master's courses in the universities. This course is not there. And it has the highest potential of 10 million per year.
Right.
And
yes,
we
log. Yeah, may I turn your question? When you give this suggestion to the educationists?
No. Our universities, I have already.
I'm sorry. We really have to. Sorry to say this. Interrupt you because we can't listen to you for a long time, but we would like to engage with you. Did you hear that?
I said I'm on the board of IIT, and for what it's worth, come and present your idea, and if it's worthwhile, we'll try and implement it. Okay?
Yes.
You know, I just want to respond to what the gentleman said about poor people, and sort of as if poor people do not have the luxury of democracy. I'd just like to point out to you that in 1975, there was an election in India after so many years of emergency declared by Mrs. Gandhi. Over 200 million people in India were considered to be poor, illiterate, whatever. They voted her out. They understood democracy. They understood right and wrong. You don't have to be rich, neither do you have to have some university or high school education to know those things.
And freedom from hunger is a fundamental right. If you don't see it as a right and you see it as something else, that's the problem.
I would also like to respond to you, sir. There is an organization, a network called FIAN, and this is the Food Rights Network. And lots of issues with regard, I work in nutrition, food and nutrition are taken up by that network for constructive ways forward as well as litigation. You know, now India also has a court, a special court for food rights. So we work on the same lines, and we are very happy, as Shehara said, to get the idea, and we are also very happy to work on the paper that you handed over. Thank you. Yes. The
Vishaka.
next.
Hi.
Vishaka.
Okay, so we are so if you can actually put your questions on the file that is outside, and also give your, willingness to volunteer, it will be very, very helpful, because we need as many hands as possible. So, thank you.